Welcome. We're really thrilled that you're here for the launch of Joanna Bourke's new book, Disgrace. I am doing the boring practical bits. My name is Ruth Beecher, and I'm part of the Sexual Harms and Medical Encounters team here at Birkbeck, so we welcome you. There is no fire alarm planned for this evening, so if the alarm goes off, please leave by one of the exits and go straight out. Don't use the lift unless you need assistance. If you do need assistance, let us know, and then the gathering place across from the front door. But we're not expecting the fire alarm to go off. The toilets, there's an accessible toilet on the ground floor near where you came through, where the books were. There's a male toilet also on that floor, female toilets on the reception level that you came in. Well, what else do I need to say? Everyone should have an evaluation form and a safeguarding statement on your table where you're sitting, and there's some spare ones here at the top. We are recording tonight's event, but we won't be recording the audience part of it, so don't worry about that. I guess we would really like you to buy the book. It's on sale in the lobby where we're going to have some refreshments later on. And we'd also like you to live tweet about the event. But if you buy the book, you can get a 20% discount by entering a code, which we can tell you all about. And for people online, we'll be posting that in the chat as well. So we've got that hashtag here, hashtag Disgrace book. Please join the conversation on Twitter and get involved. And just, I'd like to leave you with the words that if you do feel distress or any anxiety about the topics tonight, we will not be at all offended if you need to leave, or indeed if you're online, if you need to leave the online meeting. So thank you so much for coming. I'm going to hand over to our wonderful Jude Kelly, who's going to chair tonight's event, and he's the other speakers. Thank you. Well, I'm the wonderful Jude Kelly. I love the fun and acolyte of Joanna here, and we're here to celebrate her book. And it's a magnificent book, but then, you know, that's in a history of her magnificent books. You always find the title that goes with, I must read that. Rape was one of the ones that I could put in my hand, and I thought, okay, it's big, but it knows what it's going to talk about, so I'll get on with that one. And for those of you who don't know me, I am the founder of the WOW and World festivals around the world, and in fact, we have just recently come back from Rio, where the Shameless project, along with WOW for the Shameless Festival, they called the choir there, which means like shout out. Joanna launched her book also magnificently in the university there. You're going to hear from all of us in different ways. So just so you know, like, who are we? We're all going to introduce ourselves. We've got the handheld.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Maisha Sumah. I am a multi-award-winning speaker. I'm really passionate in regards to advocate and support women and young girls. So I have my own brand called SheWalksInValue, which is based on my domestic violence journey, and I sit on different boards, and I'm more of a talking person, but for a good cause, so going back to my mental health, and just creating that change, because I believe that it's not enough to just complain about things that you see happening, but it's about being that change. So I'm really passionate, again, like I said, around ending violence against women and young girls, and just being the change that I want to see. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rhea Sookdeosingh. I'm the public engagement coordinator for the Shame Project, or at least I usually am, but I'm on maternity leave at the moment. So I work with our project to build collaborations and partnerships, oversee our strategy and all the public engagement work we do. My background is in history. I did a DPhil at the University of Oxford, and I am currently turning my thesis into a monograph with Oxford University Press.
And I think it works.
Hi everyone, my name is Marai Larasi. I am a Black feminist troublemaker. Time traveller is what I call myself. My background is in ending violence against women and girls work with a specific focus on Black and global majority women and girls, and much of my work at the moment focuses on intersectionality, racial justice, and just transformative practice, including decoloniality.
And Marai is in my book. I quote you a couple of times. I'm Joanna Bourke. I'm the author of the book. So the evening is going to be this, but I'm just going to give a little bit of more context. And then Marai is going to talk about her reflections on the book. Joanna's going to read from the book. We'll all ask some questions of you and of each other perhaps, and then you will ask questions if you feel like it. We've also got people online that Alison's going to refer to if we get to that. We'll be even round up at 7-ish. And then, of course, there's a bit of alcohol, I think, hanging around outside. But we might need, yes. I would assume that most of you will not have had a chance to read this yet because it's quite a lot of press. But the double meaning of the word disgrace is the first thing to draw attention to, obviously. There's absolutely no doubt about it that it is a disgrace, as you point out, that the civilized world, and by that I mean the whole world, has not really been prepared to entertain the idea of really looking after people who are over and over again the victims and survivors of sexual violence. It's a level of epidemic right through the world, sometimes horrifically clear to us and sometimes pushed back underground. But there seems to be no universal methodology of bringing that to an end. And as a result, in order to, I suppose you could say, justify the lack of action, the disgrace of this lack of action is put back onto the people who experience the violence, who have to suffer the violence, who have to endure and live with the violence that they do live. And that disgrace is theirs to handle. Now, we know this, and we feel that we're in a perpetual loop discussing it, those of us who are involved, and you're here because you are involved. But Joanna's book is doing two things. It takes a global survey of what is really happening, both historically and contemporarily, around this issue of sexual violence and attitude to it, legal attitude to it, public attitude to it, social policy attitude to it. But it continually poses the question of do we believe that it is possible to evolve to a world where there is no rape? Do we believe it? Because you can't get what you don't believe. Now, in my role at WOW, a question I often pose to audiences is, do you actually believe that a gender-equal world will come about? And interestingly, a lot of people don't, even though they're fighting for it. And a question that provocatively Joanna always asks is, do you believe that a rape-free world is achievable? Because if you don't, then you won't be building the tools to make sure that happens. But if you do, then are we collecting enough around the right strategies, wisdoms, and policies to make that happen? And the book continuously demonstrates that it's not a given that war will result in rape. It's not a given that certain kinds of issues will result in rape. That the entitlement to take somebody else's body and, if you like, destroy it, humiliate it, abuse it, etc., that is not embedded in every society, in every culture, in all points of historical time. And therefore, it shows them clearly that there are moments when there is almost a rape-free world, would be a rape-free world, and therefore, how do we catch those moments and work through them and with them? I often say to people, 400 years ago, nobody would have believed that, I'd say all of us were capable of reading and writing, maybe. They wouldn't have believed that we would be where we are now in terms of evolving. And so that idea that the consciousness of people can change in terms of who they are, who they think they are, and how society builds on their potential, that can all change absolutely dramatically. But somehow we haven't seemed to grapple with this, but Joanna is grappling with it. So it's a magnificent book as a historical document, but also as a call to arms. Actually, I'll take away the word arms at the core. It's at the core to a philosophical idealism And she does point out in the book that some people, even her friends, said, "You bit romantic, really, aren't you?" But that kind of defeatism, as in the human condition will always be flawed in this particular direction, was not one that she would bear to live with. I think tonight we're encouraging everybody else to do the same. So I'm going to pass over to you because you've done some analysis, I think, of really time with the book, spent time with the book. So,
Thank you, Jim. So I want to start by thanking you both for writing this book. So by the way, I'm perimenopausal, so I need my notes. So I can't. Today I will have to get ready. When Joe's publisher first contacted me to ask if I would endorse the book, I had this moment, I had this spiritual response of being really flattered, like people write off me to endorse the book, all of that stuff. And then I also had this anxiety around me as a black feminist, endorsing a book written by a white woman based here in the UK. Like, what would that mean? Like, how was she going to approach it? You know, I'd spent a lot of time in UN spaces, kind of dealing with white women speaking about the world, and they were only speaking about the world that they knew, but were speaking with a lot of authority about the rest of the world. And so I thought, this is going to be tricky. And then I read the book, right? I read the book and I was like, oh, thank goodness. So I want to first of all say that Joe has gone in this book on the most amazing journey around sexual violence in multiple contexts, and you have done that with such care and integrity. And I really want to, like, that for me, like, I'm a tough critic, like, and I read the book, yes, with critique, but read the book with so much gratitude. There is one of the things, and I would encourage everyone to read the book. One of the things that was so important for me is the narrative around different different contexts that wasn't, with a declaration of positionality, but that wasn't like this anthropological ethnographic kind of thing that reproduced the colonial kind of positioning of actually, I'm the person based in Europe looking over there, right? And the book has such kind of care in terms of saying, this is what the woman, this is what people in these situations are saying about their reality, which mattered to me. So I really want to kind of say that I don't give that kind of book lightly, by the way. So I want to say a few things about what mattered to me as well. Couple of things came out really powerfully. I don't know that many scholars who pay attention to the impact of racial science on how rape is understood. And I say this with like deep passion and almost from a place of rage. Till we understand the way that different bodies are understood and inscribed and what that means for the person for justice, but also what that means for the very ways that we speak about sexual violence, we cannot construct the rape-free world. There is a narrative that defines some men as inherently more violent and some women as much more up for it. And one of the things that Joe did in this book, in the chapter on reckoning, is really got in there and named that. Named racial science, talked about what that has meant for who we understand as perpetrators and who we understand as victims. So again, someone like me, that's really important. Because randomly, another kind of person talks about it, and I sound like weirdo with the roots, and then Joe's going to be like a sister weirdo with the abandoned power. Because again, part of what works for me about this book is the naming the unnameable and going to the places of huge discomfort. So the conversations, for example, about gender, the conversations around race, using intersectionality as a core framework without hijacking an intersectional framework. So really rooting and acknowledging the Black feminist theorizing that has produced intersectionality as a concept, while at the same time, like really using that as such a foundational part of how we go through the book. My favorite part of the book is actually the end of the book, John. But not in a kind of like, oh, now we're at the end. But because that's where Joe speaks about what it would take to produce, how can we create a regulatory work? And am I allowed to come and say the different pieces? Right? They're not? Okay, cool. So, because I'm like, I think I'm meant to kind of say, like, I need to read the book, and then I did. Okay, so part of what Joe points us to is, one, like thinking about the context, thinking about the situation, thinking about locality. Again, fundamental part, like I love my Black feminist activism, I love our feminist organizing, I love how we have come together across this planet in terms of ending violence against women and girls. But a lot of how we speak has a very strong universalist kind of positioning that can sometimes silence the activism and the realities of differently positioned human beings. And when we engage with differently positioned human beings, what we do is we very much do that from a position of those poor people over there, the others over there, right? One of the things that Joe does really successfully with this is say, hold on. Folk in their own realities are best placed to understand their realities, to speak to those circumstances, to actually define solutions. And those solutions can include actually healing in a particular way, defining justice in a particular way. There's something so beautiful about respecting that, and there's so much care in respecting that. The other piece, which I was really surprised about, was pleasure. Right? And again, you know, like pleasure is a kind of like Adrienne Marie Brown speaks about pleasure. You know, pleasure comes, you know, there are a few activists that will talk about pleasure, but people don't, you know, like Alice Walker spoke about, the resistance is the secret of joy. But pleasure isn't something that is often spoken about when we're speaking about sexual violence, right? And work around sexual violence. And for me, being able to think about pleasure also offers a reclamation of body. And I speak as a survivor of sexual violence, and I speak as an activist. One of the things that's so important is us being able to talk about the pleasure that comes from the work that we do, the creativity, the art, the music, all of those things, but also how important it is for us to not be known only in our pain, right? And again, for me, that felt incredibly important. The third piece was body. One of the criticisms I have about the way that we do the work is it's done from here up. So much of what we do on these islands is really focused on, we talk about recovery from sexual violence, we talk about services, all of those things are incredibly important, and it's almost as if there's no permission for the body to show up. Right? So there's very little space. We don't speak about what healing might look like at the level of body. We speak about necessarily services that focus on cognition, services that focus on emotional well-being. And I'm like, but there are bodies like literally that have been subjected to this harm. And how do we actually do the work that have bodies show up? So again, Joe, thank you for presenting it. And then finally, transversalism. How are we going to do this if we don't communicate with each other? How are we going to do this if we don't actually collaborate? How are we going to do this if we don't connect the dots? How are we going to do it if one group of feminist activists over there don't speak to that group of feminist activists over there, and don't speak to the people that are talking about climate justice, and don't speak to the people that are talking about demilitarization? How are we going to do this if, when we speak, when for me as someone who will say Black Lives Matter, how can I do that without actually making sure that that also connects to my Black feminist sisters who are doing this work? How are we going to do this if we say trans bodies can't be in the space? How are we going to do this? Right? Transversalism offers the space for us to think about how we build a connection between movements. And again, beautifully intended principle. So I'm going to go on. I've read it more than once. Questions about what I put in the book, but I just want to say thank you to each other for the care, the integrity, the love, the passion, and the attention to detail. I don't know how you did it, but you did it really well. So thanks. Read book.
Thank you, that was really wonderful to hear, and I'm sure it was wonderful for you to hear, but I also wanted to say that it hasn't been easy to read it. We're not going to get any percentage of the profit going, but you know, still, it's really lovely to read, great, and you're a great writer. So, I mean, let's talk about why you decided to embark on it and how tricky to do it, and then the reading for it.
Let me just say thank you, Marai, because one of the things she didn't say in her over generous comments is that after she gave an endorsement, she then came to me and we had long conversations about what I'd done wrong. Which I had time, of course, to make corrections, and I'm eternally grateful for that. And not only, of course, for your, you know, really mild, generous, but to the heart of the matter, critiques of my work. And the critiques that I have been given over 10 years in writing this book, from feminists, from colleagues, scholars, other scholars working in the field, from survivors, from people who nearly didn't survive. And I think probably I learned the most from them. And I'm really, so grateful for all of that hope that I received, and of course from friends. You can't do a project like this without having networks of friends who are supporting you, who are arguing with you all the time, but basically are going to be always there for you. Before I read something, I also just really want to say thank you to the Wellcome Trust, who provided funding for the Shame Project, which has quite literally transformed the way I think about the world in which I live. There are times when money helps, and they have been incredibly generous. And in particular, my colleagues on the Shame Project, you can see them scattered throughout the room here with shame badges on, who have critiqued me every step of the way. So before I read that, I did want to acknowledge all of that hope. I'm just going to read a few sections from the book. This is actually the start of the chapter on a rape-free world, because actually before I actually read, poetry is really important to me. And you talked a minute ago about pleasure and the body, and for me, if there is one thing that really stimulates me to work on intellectual topics, it is actually through the reading of poetry, which is probably an unfashionable thing for a historian to say. But I start the book with a poem, and I'm just going to recite that part of that poem now, because I started with this poem. This book started with a poem, and it was a poem by the most brilliant poet, Wanda Coleman. She is a woman of color, and in the 1970s, she wrote a poem that is simply entitled "Rain." And in that poem, which is the poem I start the book with, it's a story she tells about a woman of color who her home is invaded, and she is sexually assaulted by a group of men. Her boyfriend comes back, and he is furious that his exclusive entitlement over her body has been breached, that he also rapes her. The rapists, when they leave, they pretend like it's been a consensual encounter. They are armed, by the way. And they kiss her goodbye, and they say, if you want to meet again, we're free. And the poem ends with these lines, which stimulated this book. The poem ends by saying, she waited until she was sure they would not return and kill. She picked up the telephone, and she made the mistake of believing that the world would understand. Such simple words. And that is the poem that started this book for me. But by the end of the book, I was actually in a very different place. because by the end of the book, I was in the chapter, a rape-free world. How to think about a world where the world will understand. Now, this book has bombarded readers with a lot of grim stories, surveys and statistics. So now it's time, well, for the good news. It doesn't have to be this way. Through the creation and cultivation of effective coalitions and strategies of resistance, it is possible to forge rape-free futures for everyone. It's not going to be easy. The most debilitating myth for people seeking to forge a world without sexual violence is the assertion that violence is inherent to male sexuality. Many commentators claim that this form of violence is deeply wired in evolutionary terms, or that it is culturally omnipresent. When writing this book, some friends of mine even accused me, some friends, by the way, was Indian, even accused me of hopelessly utopian to believe in a world in which rape has been eradicated, but that is my contention. After all, to be human is to seek companionship, collaboration, friendship, love. This is why the first step in eradicating sexual violence is to acknowledge that we don't have to accept that it is inevitable. Now, effective solutions to high levels of sexual violence are difficult to pinpoint, not because there are no positive ways forward, but for the opposite reason. The strategies open to us are legion. And even though the last chapter is devoted to those strategies, in fact, the whole book provides examples from the past and the present. The awe-inspiring creative diversity of human existence offers an exhilarating range of options for anti-rape activists. If we can demonstrate a keenness to listen and a willingness to learn. Crucially, the task of imagining, thinking, planning, and acting on forging rape-free worlds requires us to pay attention to our local contexts within global economic, ideological, and political frameworks. My point is that the cumulative effect of local change is global transformation. Effective movements against gender violence need to celebrate difference, even though this will inevitably fuel disagreements and dissent within activist movements. I will be elaborating on this point further in the book, drawing on the concept of transversalism, which sounds really long and ugly, but I can think of a better word. I explain it in my video. However, before turning to this overarching premise for effective resistance, I will address 4 other tenets. These are locality, diversity, pleasure, and the body. Justice is not only locally relevant, but culturally variable. By necessity, anti-rape initiatives will be diverse. Strategies will also be diverse. There is no singular template. This does mean, however, that different feminist strategies will be in conflict with one another. And after I talk about these different strategies, I turn to pleasure, because I started my talk just a minute ago by talking about my pleasure in reading our poetry. I will finish with a statement. We need to embrace pleasure. Anti-rape activism, many people in this room will know, is tiring, dispiriting, depressing, but more positive and creative approaches are important if girls, women, and other repressed peoples are to be empowered, while also encouraging the evolvement of boys, men, and other potential oppressors. While not minimizing the seriousness of the task ahead, femicide is rampant throughout the world. Anti-rape activism must be enticing, even seductive, if we are to change people's hearts and minds. Activists are emboldened by art, literature, poetry, film, performance theatre, and music. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons why Shane's collaboration with the WOW Foundation has been so important to our team, personally, but also to audiences throughout the world. The poet Adrian Rich has reflected on the importance of all forms of artistic expression. not as a privileged, sequestered rendering of human suffering, but as a form of resistance which totalizing systems wish to quell. She insists that art and literature are capable of reaching into us for what is still passionate, still unintimidating, still unquenched. She insists that art and literature are what we need. The former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher famously coined the phrase, "There is no alternative," in aid of her liberal policies, which earned her the nickname Tina. However, Rich argued that the imagination's road opens before us, giving the lie to the brutal dictum, "There is no alternative." Rich maintained that when poetry lays its hand on our shoulders, we are to an almost physical degree touched and moved. So, I am an optimist. Every community has a wealth of knowledge that can be used to address the particular needs and desires for a rape-free world. The rich tapestries of public and private resistance that are open to us are inspiring. They are increasing. Wherever we are situated, academics, homemakers, labourers, shopkeepers, secretaries, publishers, journalists, civil servants, teachers, students, entertainers, novelists, artists, lawyers, doctors, scientists, the unemployed, and so on, we can make a difference in our local context. Each chapter of this book provides concrete examples of people doing just that. Effective activism requires each of us to exploit our specific abilities, skills, skills of influence. Intersectionality, which reminds us of difference, and transversalism, which provides ways of acting together while embracing difference, are powerful tools to achieving a shared goal, the rape-free world. Transversalism emphasizes the need to pay attention to interpersonal and intercommunal differences. It encourages uneasy coalitions, not mergers. The true enactment of solidarity requires reciprocal exchanges, focusing on political, economic, and social projects that will reduce or eradicate sexual violence. It is a task that will require the political, ideological, and discursive labour of every global citizen.
The whistling, who did the whistling? Yeah. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit actually as well about the work of WOW and our work on fame, and then we're all going to cover a chat each about our work. The first thing I wanted to talk about was picking up on your idea of poetry and the role of art and the role of the textured, layered way that art permeates not just the head, but the heart and the body. I mean, Shelley says that poets are the unofficial legislators of the world. Is that true for the official legislators of the world? However, I also think that art inevitably sits in its own context. It sits in its own social and power context. And much as I want art to belong to everybody and be part of everybody's life, I also recognise the fact that art places people within the power structures of the time and then reinforces them. So it's very, very difficult, particularly when you look at rape, not to be drawn to artistic stories and representations that actually moralise, be commissioned for, keep people in their places. So I mean, I want art to be this potent, magic thing, but actually, you know, it is the thing that emanates from society, the painful, isn't it?
Absolutely, art is permeated through and through with regimes of power, regimes of repression, regimes of exploitation, of colonialism, of racism, of misogyny, of all of those things. I mean, art doesn't stand above any of these things, but what art does or can, before I say that, and of course, so much of art has been explicitly in the fight for injustices in our world. But at the same time, it has this potential. It has the potential for each and every one of us to create things that mean something, that take ourselves out of ourselves in a sense, while still providing that identity, that self. So it provides this kind of place where we can be rooted in ourselves and yet imagine, explore something beyond that. And that's why I think art has this real potential to help change worlds. It's just one of many things that can help us change our worlds, obviously. And it's one that I have found, in my personal history, particularly effective, because as an historian, I don't tend to analyze poetry or paintings, or even though I have published a book which does precisely that, but actually in most of my work I don't do that. And I certainly don't use art in that sense. What I use art to give me is a way of thinking beyond myself and a way of thinking about language and structure and meaning. And that's, in different creative ways, which I find really illuminating. But no, it is not intrinsic to artistic practices to be liberational or anything like that.
No. And I'd say that I'm a theatre director will know that I'm a passionate believer in art and imagination to conjure worlds, amazing worlds and hopeless situations. How can you speak or write too well and that we're imagining the world and then walking towards it? Because I feel in general that we give art a free pass a lot in terms of the canon and the history of it, and we sort of assume that it's been on the side of the angel, whether you actually look at what it reinforces over and over again, it's very often not on that side. But I just wanted to sort of delve into that. I mean, basically, for us to go and be even more critical what normalizing symbolism has become in our society, how much we normalize injustice, and art is one of the methods of doing that. But I also want to ask you, as a historian, whether there are certain moments when we say, well, humanity can't go back. Like, you can't not have landed on the moon. Let's give that a example. Humanity did land on the moon. So there are moments when you can say it will never go backwards, and then there are plenty of evidence of society doing just that, both philosophically and even in terms of limiting knowledge, like theory systems, etc. So I'm interested to know, on this journey called the rape-free world, as a historian, do you feel as if we're sort of as far as we've ever got towards thinking that's possible, or are we in any way still backwards?
Oh, Jude, that's a really horrible thing. I've just made the pitch that I'm an optimist. Exactly, because clearly, I mean, the book also started in huge anger about how in the world is it that things now, and I'll give an example from Britain, things now are worse than they were 40 years ago for victims of sexual abuse who are looking for particular kinds of legal forms of justice. So, I mean, I give the statistic actually in the former book that you mentioned, which is over 10 years old. And in that book, my fury was tied, I think I should have a lot of things actually, but that, well, it was tied to the fact that in the 1970s in Britain, 1 in every 3 cases of rape that get to court, 1 in 3 ended in conviction. 1970s. 1980s, 1 in 4 end in a conviction. 1990s, 1 in 10 end in conviction. When I was writing that great book, it was 1 in 20 end in a conviction. Now, I'm not a classical feminist. In fact, I'm strongly against that. But, you know, something is wrong there. You know, we've had 40 years of feminism, of second wave feminism, 40 years of really good legal reforms. I mean, once I really kind of support. We've had 40 years of education, we've had 40 years of this, and yet, at least in this one sense, things have gotten much worse. Today it's 1 in 22, 23, by the way. So, you know, and also, and this comes up really, I hope really strongly in the book, you know, my fury about other things that have got worse. Communication has got worse between feminist groups. I mean, feminist groups have always sort of been fighting their different fights. You know, when I was young, it was the radical feminists against the socialist feminists, etc. But you know, actually, we have not managed yet to forge better connections. We're still investing so much time, so much energy, physical energy, let alone emotional energy, in fighting each other. So in that sense, things haven't got better. I do think there are these cycles. But I think now is a moment to start thinking anew about, well, what can we do about this? How can we start thinking differently about this? And this is where I've learned so much from my sisters in the last 10 years writing this book.
So when I started the WOW festival, taking a quiz about pleasant, I was really trying to say that one way for all of us to care enough that girls and women, non-binary, can go forward, believing that the potential have the right to be realised, is to make people so happy and celebrate what people have actually achieved already, despite being told that they wouldn't and couldn't. And you know, I very, very much wanted to get all of us to join the dots and go, okay, there's a reason for this being bad, because it tried that being bad, and that being bad, and that being bad. And there's also a reason why all of it could be better, because people have got to understand the systemic nature of injustice and the intersectional systemic nature of injustice, which is why King Pension's work is so groundbreaking and will be, you know, she should have got the Nobel Prize actually. But the thing is that kind of understanding of systemic infection is new language actually. It's under the common parlance, some of them use it, but it's increasingly something that people understand. But I wanted very much for people to celebrate so that they can find the return to anger with stamina. And obviously WOW's now in many parts of the world have been for many years. But as Jo said, we then joined together through this project Shameless, which was to like wave a flag in the air with joy at the idea that people will not be silenced, that there were things that must be talked about, that were on the other side of shame was unsilencing. And that unless people talk about everything from, you know, from aftercare to future sexual pleasure to lack of, you know, attention to poor education, unless everybody talks together about it, you wouldn't have a solid way forward. So the Shameless Festival, which we've done in London, just in Rio, and we hope to do more often, is a deep dive into one of the subjects that WOW covers, obviously you cover sexual violence, and it's a festival that is about pleasure and celebration of the fact that we have the right to speak, and that the idea of being shamed and silence has got to be broken through. I was thinking about Winnie over there with her wonderful first novel, and then second novel about to come out. It's all right, already. I'm just giving you a shout out because you created the first festival of this kind. And it's become very important, I think, for women all over the world, women and non-violent people all over the world, to feel that they have to act in solidarity without being naive about the fact that people are still oppressing each other within the ranks of government. So it's, you know, it's not okay to sort of go, and they're not saying this forever, like, oh, we'll just all get together and model. You know, part of doing festivals like this is to hear many different kinds of stories told directly from the people experiencing them. And it's like not hiring without a kind of notion of curating a hierarchy. It's complex, but I don't think that unless we gather all these stories, it's pretty much what you're doing in the book, we can't really find the way. So this idea of festival celebration, which is what Shameless and what WOW is, I think really is like spreading out a massive mosaic and saying each of these tiles is pure and on its own, what we have to do. So that's sort of, and I just hope that we can remain optimistic within a circumstance at the moment, which is encouraging us to be discouraged. So I'm going to pass over to you to talk next, Rhea, about your work in shame and how the impact is had on you as well.
That's really nice to see. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks, Jude. I'm going to talk about the Shameless Festival and our collaboration with the WOW Foundation from the perspective of public engagement, which basically describes a whole range of activities in which academics and academic research groups like ours at Shame work with partners outside of the university. And I have notes as well. I'm going to plain baby brain on that. There's no way I would remember this without it. And I'm going to use some of the things you said, Joe, in the final chapter of your book as a jumping off point. And in fact, I think you've already said a couple of them. So I'm going to flatter myself and say great minds think alike. So the first one is through the creation and cultivation of effective coalitions and strategies of resistance, it is possible to forge great free futures for everyone. And then I think this was overused. The uninspiring and creative diversity of human existence offers an exhilarating range of options for anti-rape activists, if we can only demonstrate a keenness to listen and a willingness to learn. And that last bit, a keenness to listen and a willingness to learn, is another way of saying what we need to do when we do public engagement. It's a process by which we work with other people, organizations, partners, audiences, in our case, survivors, activists, practitioners, and say, what is it that we don't know and what can we learn from the people that we're working with? We do a lot of this work, but obviously the big one is our collaboration with WOW. And so before I go into that, another bit about transversalism, which is Joanna says, starts from the basic belief that each person recognizes the world in their own position, and that as a consequence, all knowledge is partial and incomplete. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really crucial because although public engagement has been a thing for over a decade, there can still be an inclination with academic research to be a little bit cloistered and to treat any engagement as, this is a sort of gift that we're taking out into the world and sharing. Mm-hmm. And that's an important element of it, definitely, is to taking outside of the walls of these ivory towers. But more important is for us to say, okay, what do we know? And that's, a fair amount. We have a lot of research expertise in our group. But more crucially, what do we not know? And who knows that stuff? So working with WOW has been really powerful because we've taken the research that our group does, from child sexual abuse to rape and sexual violence during the HIV/AIDS epidemic to post-colonial responses to sexual violence in Africa, the use of medical and psychiatric evidence in courts in England and Wales, looking at feminist rape crisis services in Paris, all this expertise, but saying what can we do with it, and how do we marry that with WOW's festival model that Jude's talking about, that brings together diverse audiences in a sort of celebratory way that can both say this is a problem, but we can come together and solve it. So the process was really, I think, for all of us, really transformative, and it took something else that Joanna talked about, which is about being rooted in your own position. So we recognize or we are what we have to offer, but taking on board the work that other people do. And I think it was not only beneficial for the people in our group. So we're used to, researching in libraries and archives, doing very solitary work. It's in its own way creative, but not in the same way that the work the WOW team does. And coming together, pushing beyond our comfort zones to create a space for all of these voices to come together. Funders, across the board, emphasize that public engagement needs to be research-led. And of course it is, that has to be the starting point. Joanna's research, everyone else's research. But what we try to do actually is to make our work other-led. So to center the voices of survivors, to center the voices of our partners, to center the voices of other organizations we work with. So for this festival, I think like the WOW Festival sought to be a space that created a platform for all kinds of voices, that it was celebratory, but it was also really important for it to be a space where people were, I know there's a backlash against it, but spaces that were safe, where people felt protected. And that was really important for all of us, so that the work we were doing wasn't sort of exploitative. It takes a lot to speak out, and not everyone can speak out, not everyone wants to speak out. And we had a real responsibility to ensure that when people did this, whether they were speakers, whether they were people coming to take part in our workshops, we in the audience for talks like this, that there were measures in place to make sure that everyone felt okay. And that was something I think we all found. We brought our portion of this knowledge. We didn't have all the answers, so we sought even more. We worked with Survivors Press, put together a suite of resources to make sure that everyone at the festival was able to have the fullest experience, bring their biggest self, bring all of their self, contribute in the ways that mattered. So the first festival took place in South London at the Battersea Arts Centre. The second festival took place in Rio, as Jude alluded to. Some of our team were there. I think the important bit with both of these is that they were both local. They're both localized. Because I think even when we pay attention to local context, we still, I think, have a sense that local is somewhere else, that localized impact is there, whereas it is universal. But no, the way we approached the festival in London was the same way we approached it in Rio. It's not for us to direct these efforts. It's for us to use the resources we have. That's funding, that's data, that's, in a way, the luxury to do this kind of work. There are lots of people who would like to do this work, they can't. And to bring all of that together to create opportunities for the people who really should be. So when Joanna says integrate strategies must attend to local needs and engage political labor of local activists, they cannot be outsourced to or directed by outsiders. I think that's the approach we take, that we take in all of our work. And it makes a difference. Academics here will be familiar with impact in terms of the research excellence framework. It makes us all feel very cringy about impact because it needs to be measured. It's really for our own benefit. It's to get more funding. But I think we can work together in the ways that we've worked together with WOW and with the people who contributed to Shameless. It does make a difference in people's lives. So we know from people who attended Shameless that in some cases, having that kind of space, having that platform, having that opportunity to come together with other people in a way that was celebratory, but also edifying and challenging and transformative and creative, meant that some people walked away and said, you know what, actually, I'm in a position where I feel safe enough now to disclose. There were people who said, I'm not at that point yet, but I feel like I can start this journey now because I was in a space where I recognized something of myself and my experience. I saw people like me. I saw places I can go to continue my learning, to go down another path. We know people created their own peer networks after meeting at the festival. We know that practitioners looked at the way we approach safeguarding and said, I facilitate workshops, I work with survivors, I want to take some of this with me when I go away and apply it to my work. So it makes a huge difference. And I think, we're here to celebrate the research that Joanna's done that we see in this book, but I think also to celebrate the work she's done as a leader in terms of bringing together this research group where people have not only academic strengths, but strength in working out in communities, in being creative and actually making a difference, and putting it all to work, putting it to work for something beyond our own benefit. And so I think that would be a good point for me to pass off now to Maisha to talk about how initiatives like this, where, you know, we're trying to use our resources to benefit people other than ourselves, can actually make a real difference in people's lives.
Thank you. So for me personally, I would say attending the event and being able to sit on 2 different panels was really good because it was a very safe space where we were able to not too much, but we was also able to learn. I think it's definitely really important that there was a space when I was able to actually get workshop myself, whereas as a survivor, and as much as you're passionate to give and you're really engaged in sparking that change, sometimes you need time to pull back into yourself. So for me, a key thing was as a speaker was that okay, I was on the panels for those in the morning continue, but then I was able to go into different sessions such as writing. That was something I hadn't really spent a lot of time in, but then I took the session and I fell in love with it. I've got that little notes now, and I'm thinking to you to write because sometimes, especially with my Londoners and the things that I do, it does get me busy, but then remembering to prioritize myself the same way that I would prioritize to help others, whether that's for school or you know what that I do, it's also important for me to separate that time to invest in me. And this is something that I learned because I was thinking as I was coming here, well, like there's a lot of benefits that I took from the festival, but it was one thing when I was on the panel, so it was in regards to navigating triggers. And there was a lot that I learned, and unfortunately, because when I was on the panel, there were certain things I hadn't gone through. So there was some amazing women speaking about when they unfortunately seen the fact that they were abused by. Now, I hadn't seen my abuse for about 6 years from when he sent it to me in 3 different locations. So, you know, when I was in the event, I was listening, I was taking notes of what they were saying, but I couldn't relate. But I still understood that it's good to have these things with you in case it don't happen. So unfortunately in June, I ended up seeing him and I broke because he was just staring at me. I mean it's quite crazy to walk on the street and see someone that tried to murder you 6 years later just staring at you. And that's the same thing they gave you when they tried to murder you. So I remember I was with my friend and I came from delivering like a workshop for young people about youth violence. And I remember in that moment, again, I was like, I froze, I was shocked, I was trying to cover my face, but it wasn't something that I did while thinking. It was like almost that breathing, that flight or fight mode. And, you know, again, I could literally feel it in my stomach, I literally got sick. You know, I cried because it was really scary. And straight after that, I called some people to speak to them about it, and the response that I got wasn't healthy. So the first response I got was, oh, you didn't really care about you, you didn't like you anymore, we were just looking at you. So it was really like downplaying my experience. And then my aunt was like, oh, maybe because you put on weight and you had to do for years. So we get in touch into like insecurities. And obviously when I left that abusive relationship, I unfortunately developed eating disorders at the time, which affected like my health and stuff. So, but it had nothing to do with what I was basically sharing. So I remember I went home and I cried because it was really difficult. And a lot of people get that narrative of your black woman, and because there's a lot of things I haven't enjoyed, unfortunately, that actually never come through. Those things I didn't need to go through those things to become who I am today. But it was, everyone was acting like everything was normal. And I was angry. So when I was really on the panel, people were speaking about when you go through something, and people, like everyone around me was just like, well, you bounce back from everything, my stuff. Look what you've gone through that you bring up today, but that doesn't take away from how I feel in that moment. And I remember I actually called someone from the panel that I was on, because we connected through the event on Instagram. And I remember I called her, I think she was friends with Love Island. I was like, I took literally 5 minutes, and I called her and I spoke to her. And she, you know, she gave me like advice, and we kind of touched back on the things that we spoke about all the time, like grounding, and just remember that because I felt very vulnerable in the sense of I was like angry against myself because I was like, why did I try to hide my face? For me, it was like I was felt like you build yourself over these years to be so strong, and then you've now covered it up. I understood that just because I covered my face didn't mean that I was weak either. And I felt like regardless of that, these relationships that women had quite broken, that's in English, but I understood that broken prayer is still colour. And I still colour. I'm still someone that's bright, and the path that I've taken now is a bright. It's not inspiring myself, maybe, but inspiring others. So for me, it was really key that I was on the panel, because even though I didn't have much support apart from actually a best friend, which she actually passed away last month. So my best friend passed away. So I came to the funeral not long ago, but I had to be there because that was the recognition. So, you know, I still was having to get that way. But I remember speaking to her, and the advice that she gave about as well was really important. And in fact, I still remember the things that I learned on the panel. For me was key. So I would say I took a lot of value from being on that panel. It wasn't like a panel where you just give, and I believe that you receive a different way, as long as you're always focused on giving. Because your hands are open to give, and your hands are always open to receive. But for me, I received so many gems on that panel that when I was in a situation of people that I accepted to comfort me, to be there for me, that gave me, you know, words of insecurity, then just downplay the whole experience, and, you know, made it seem like, again, just get through it, like we'll be fine. Because okay, I can't get to that point, but I'm there right now. But taking these things from the panel that I was on, I was able to like understand how my brain works from the trauma. I was able to listen why I responded the way that I did. Had I not been on the panel, or even in that session, because obviously there was different stuff going on, I would have not known how to move forward from that experience. And for me, as being someone who was on the panel, but also listening to others on the panel, it was really key for me to be able to receive those gems. So they really helped me to not feel down, not to be upset. I was like, yeah, I'm crying, not like it's fine. It doesn't take away from who you are. And when you have that awareness, it gives you that power. Because you're not going to almost felt like I lost that power, because it was like, my child, like, you know, why were you scared, and why were you shaking, and you know, so and so. But it helps me to understand that you just don't know what experience you might go through. So no matter where you are, whoever, whatever you are at, or in a sense, I don't know if using that line, like, but in the sense of whether you're even here or whether you're not, like each one of you guys add that value, and you guys all have something that you can give to the next person next to you. So I think it was really key. Like I still think about I thought the next one. I really love it because it really helped me in such a moment that I didn't know that those gems I was going to need in a moment where I was under a lot of pressure. But through the gems that I received being on that panel, even though I went through quite straight that put a lot of pressure on me, I still came out of balance. So yeah, I'm really very grateful. Yeah.
Right, I think that's a very important thing we just said, because Joanna was talking about, you know, bringing knowledge, but also new learning, and there's also unlearning, something which we talk about a lot, which is like we do WOWs right across the world, about WOW Australia, the countries here tonight. We've learned so much from First Nations women in Australia. Hearing them talk about things, strategies and ideas and philosophies which you don't know you'll need, and as you say, sometime later, through the ups and downs of your life, you think, oh, I can draw on that. So this constant well of support, if you're open to it, is absolutely amazing. And on the other side of the game, the whole point is it is easy to push back into a same space, but you can come back out of it again.